As we've been reporting, two more Republican senators say they will not support the Senate bill to overhaul the Affordable Care Act. Senators Mike Lee and Jerry Moran announced their decision Monday night. CBS News contributor Frank Luntz spoke to a bipartisan group of lawmakers last week for a wide-ranging discussion about key agenda items, including health care.
Let's take the issue of health care. The Republicans demonized Obamacare, and the Democrats are demonizing the Republican legislation. Is that the way we should be discussing what may be the most important issue you will deal with this year?
Some of us probably have philosophical differences. I believe that if you live in America, you've got a right to affordable quality health care. And I think probably everybody agrees on that value. And the difference is, how do you get us there?
I can speak recently. There was no outreach to Democrats in the House to work together. So it wasn't a matter of saying, here's what we're doing, and you're either on board or you're not. There was not a significant, meaningful effort made from the beginning saying, hey, let's put our heads together and try to work this out.
The challenge that we here on these issues, these jugular issues, is a Republican alternative or a Democrat solution. The American people aren't concerned about labels. They want to know about their health care. People want to know, what are my co-pays? How will I take my child to the doctor? What does it look like if I can't afford it? If we're not answering those basic questions, and if we cannot find a point to rally around, it's our fault.
Let's bring in Frank Luntz. Frank, what is the impact, first of all, of these two GOP defections?
Well, I think Senator Mike Lee's refusal to support the latest Republican plan was expected, at least by some in the White House. Jerry Moran's opposition to it was not. And I think that's significant. When you lose 3 senators, now it's actually up to 4 at this point, even with John McCain returning, they're going to have to make significant changes to the legislation. And here's the problem. Every time they do something to win over a moderate Republican, a so-called moderate, you then lose the support of the right. Every time they move the legislation towards the conservative perspective, you lose a moderate. I don't know at this point how they're going to be able to get to those 50 votes that they need for Mike Pence to break the tie. It's too complicated.
Well, Frank, let's look more broadly at your conversation with this group of 12 lawmakers. The discussion included 3 senators and 9 representatives. 6 were Democrats and 6 were Republicans. You asked the lawmakers about the Senate health care fight, Russia's interference in the 2016 election, and their views of the media. But you started by asking how they feel about going into work on Capitol Hill.
As you came here, as you walked into the building today and you look up, what does it mean to you? This is a significant place. People travel across the globe to see this building.
But there's a reverence that I think when you walk in to the Capitol, you can just feel it. It's here. It's in the air.
I first came here in 3rd grade on a trip, with my parents and my mom, who's a teacher. And I still do feel that reverence. That's a great word for it, and the gratitude that you're able to see a problem and solve it.
I have the same feeling I had the first time I walked into the building. And that is, I can't believe a kid off the streets of Paterson, New Jersey is here. And you know how proud I am of my city. And I'm affected by it. And I'm proud of everybody around this table.
What is it that choked you up right there? What are you thinking?
I'm sorry. I was thinking of my mom and dad. And they couldn't believe I got here either. And the guys in my neighborhood, they never knew that I even had this in mind. I'm proud to work with people, and I got a job to do, and I'm here to do it, and nobody's gonna, I don't yield. You know that one, right, Kel? I don't yield. And I'm not going to be dissuaded or distracted. And that's what I feel every time I walk into this building.
When we're dealing with the challenges of the day, when we're dealing with the debates of the day and a lot of the superficial, hyper-partisan noise and rhetoric that goes on that can sometimes drown out, what really matters, I think that's what I remember is the people who hired me, the people who voted for me to come here. And I think of my brothers and sisters, our veterans, whose lives have been forever affected by the decisions made in this place.
There's no one who has sacrificed more to be here than you. And the audience can't see what you have sacrificed, and I'll let you decide if you want to share it with them. But could you ever imagine going from the battlefield to a very different type of battlefield?
I don't think there's much of a better jump than to go from one of our theaters of war to this battlefield of Washington, D.C. You know, when I was injured, when I lost my legs in Afghanistan, the toughest part about it was not the physical part of it, the injury. The toughest part about it was that I thought I'd lost my purpose in life, which was defending this country. And what really brought it full circle for me was that when I was elected as a member of Congress, I got to take the exact same oath that I took when I entered the military. That's what truly brought it back to me, that, you know what, I was able to regain that purpose that I thought I had lost.
Where I come from in West Virginia, if you go to work every day, and I've said this, and I didn't say this because it's correct, this is a hostile working environment. In a way, you're working with people that are basically expected to work against you, raise money against you, and go out and campaign against you if you're in cycle. So I've taken my own pledge. I'm the only one who's taken it so far. I invite all of you that I will not, any way, shape, or form, raise money or campaign against a sitting colleague.
So, Frank, what stood out to you from that exchange?
Well, first off, it's rare to hear a member of Congress actually show so much authentic emotion that, frankly, they break down. And I'm grateful for CBSN for putting that on the air. It's also very impressive to hear Congressman Mast from Florida talk about his sacrifice on the battlefield and compare that to what he's doing now in Washington and how that restored his confidence and his belief in himself. And finally, Senator Manchin, when he proposed, and there are several people in that focus group who said that they would support his legislation, or at least his commitment that he would not campaign against others because that adds to the poisonous environment in Washington. What you heard there was authenticity. What you heard there is honesty. Members who are struggling between the commitments that they have to their constituents and the commitments that they have to their political party, and how they try to address that in their day-to-day lives.
Well, Frank, let's play the next section. We're going to hear lawmakers talking about the media coverage of Congress.
Sometimes when I go back home and people talk, just what is going on there? And I said, I wish you could be there for the full 24 hours and not just that 3-minute piece that you saw on TV, because for all of us being here, like Billy and I, we get along so well. There's so many of us that really get along well. But you don't see that happen. And Mike and I work together on childhood cancer. And that's something that's neither Republican or Democrat. That's just true American.
I think elections are about contrast. So when you're running in your election cycles, it's about the contrast that you can paint with the other party or the other person. Governing is about finding common ground with that person. And unfortunately, too often, media makes a lot of profit off that contrast. And you have to be careful how you win, because however you win, that's what people will expect out of you. So if you win with division and with distrust and with disgust, you're going to have to use that as a narrative while you're serving in office. That poisons the country. It polarizes the country. And so what you see on the news so often is what you see on campaign trails, the contrast. But what we miss is not the underbelly, it's the reality of daily life that Mike Bennett from Colorado and myself worked on, investing in opportunity, ways of bringing resources back to poor communities.
In the 7 terms I've been in Congress, now you have these outside groups scoring your votes. Now you have media picking fights with the other side. And the expectation is that we are going to hate the other side of the aisle. And I don't think that's a very positive, that's not good for the body politic. I think it's destructive. And I've seen that change in just a short time I've been in the Congress. And a lot of it's impacted by outside groups. I think all of us in the room have a genuine respect for where we stand as members of Congress. We respect what we do. We may have differences, but we need to be civil about that and not take this other tone of anger and hatred that too often plays out, and sometimes it plays out in the media.
I think if I would point to anybody as the greatest saboteur of our election, it would be the press and the way that they drive the message that they want to drive, hands down.
Yeah, but what's the alternative? You want to do it like Greece and Turkey in terms of how they control their media, and particularly their print media. I think the press has done a fantastic job. I get more problems with the press than you do, for crying out loud. But the fact of the matter is, Peter Zenger is rolling over in his grave when he sees what's happened over the last 6 months. And it started out...
The alternative is more editorializing and less opinion.
Okay.
You're not saying you do.
We may agree on that.
Frank.
But the point of the matter is, there is a point when you're intimidating the press. That's where it starts. And you're trying to get them to move in a very different direction. And that is a serious problem. You may think that nobody's listening and watching. I disagree with that. If there's anything that brings Americans together, they do not want to be made fools of.
So, Frank, how do these lawmakers think media coverage overall has affected their ability to find consensus?
They think that it has undermined it, almost unanimously they think it's undermined it because the media focuses on the conflict rather than, if I get the words out, rather than the effort to work together. And what was interesting for me, and you may hear it in some of these conversations coming up, is that each of these members have worked with someone from the other party in that room. And I had no idea when these members agreed to participate that you have members who worked on health care, members who worked on the opiate challenge, members who worked on job training, and so many of these different issues, that there actually is a level of cooperation that the American people do not know. Because all they get, and we're all guilty of it, is these 20-second sound bites of members just going at each other, and the angrier that they are, the more likely it is that it gets on television.
Well, Frank, stand by. We've got a lot more to discuss. Up next, more from Frank's focus group. Lawmakers discuss the business of governing and the prospects for tax reform and the budget. Earlier this month, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell acknowledged he might need Democratic votes to pass the Republican health care bill. Democrats have been unified in opposition to GOP efforts so far. When Frank Luntz spoke with a bipartisan group of lawmakers last week, the group discussed why it's become so hard to find consensus.
The framers set this place up to resolve our differences. And they had a view that we would have differences. We're in a democracy. The expectation is we should have differences. They set up this incredibly elegant mechanism to deal with our differences. And today in our politics, we somehow don't accept differences, and there's an idea that it's my way or the highway. The partisan stuff is what everybody wants, and the fact that somebody disagrees with me means that they're somehow a failure. It's exactly the opposite of what the framers of the Constitution believed. We're consumed by the 90% of idiotic politics and spending 10% of the time getting things done. And I think if the people around this table were left to their own devices, we actually would do what the framers of the Constitution wanted us.
We, I think, have, over the past 25 years, really surrendered our own sovereignty to pollsters and focus groups. And they have a place, Frank, they have a place, but what if we didn't know?
Who invited you?
Can
you kill his mic or somebody?
What if we didn't know the numbers? What if we didn't know what was out there across the landscape of the great country we know as America? What if we had to come here and respond instinctually, almost, to each other? I think that works better. I think it works better because I look at Kelly and we don't agree on anything politically, but we get along so well.
I think we should be reminded on be careful how you win. If you win by running races on division and disgust and fear, you're going to have to then work as a legislator in that same narrative.
So it's not just Democratic groups, Republican groups, it's purity tests in our own parties. Yep. And that continues to polarize, because we have these litmus tests that I'm more of a Democrat than you because I'm 100% Democrat. We're going to have spirited debates. The key is, how do you do it with sportsmanship, with some grace and civility.
Can you
and
disagree
that's
without being disagreeable?
Whether it's disagreements within our own respective parties or if it's disagreements from opposite parties, I think the point is about having respect. And here in this body in Congress, yes, it stems from having relationships. It stems from having an authentic respect for our colleagues, whether we agree or disagree on one issue or almost all issues.
Frank, it was so fascinating to hear that part of your conversation. What stood out to you in that exchange?
They do respect each other, and they enjoy each other's company, and they want to work together, and they expect to disagree. And the issue is a dozen, maybe 15 members that get out of control and say things that they shouldn't, and those things do happen. There are members who would rather shout than get things done. But for the most part, these dozen members who represent 12 different states in the country, every political persuasion, going all the way across from very conservative to very liberal, they emphasized in the stories that they told a level of cooperation that the public simply isn't aware of. And you can't say that Congress doesn't have its challenges. And I know that most people think Congress is broken. But I'll agree with a congressman from New Jersey who took a shot at me and research, which I love, that if left to their own devices, without the pollsters and without the cameras, they actually could resolve so many of the differences that they have. It just seems like the entire world, the pressure on them is so great not to cooperate, not to compromise, but they are getting things done. The public just isn't told about it.
So, Frank, that was going to be my follow-up question, and apologies for cutting so close here, but I believe the congressman's exact quote was they think they've surrendered sovereignty to pollsters. I mean, that's pretty harsh, Frank. That's what you do as a member of the political class. And so when he says, what if we didn't know? In reality, that doesn't seem anywhere near the world we live in today, where things are focus tested, as you well know, and messages are tried and trial balloons are floated. There is a science to this business of politics that seems far different from perhaps what the framers could have ever imagined.
You're absolutely correct, and I'm a participant in it. And make no mistake, as this conversation is happening, I, as the moderator, I was grateful because I don't think there have ever been 12 members who had this much time to talk about so many different issues, an even number of Republicans and Democrats, senators and House members. I'm thinking, what's my own role in this and my participation in this process? And I want to be careful that the language that I create, and I do very little of this now, but I still do some, that the language that I create is positive and brings people together, rather than that negativity that bothers so many Americans and, frankly, bothers me. I left this conversation feeling better about Congress, feeling as good about Congress as I have since I got involved in 1993. But you know what? We're all somewhat responsible, and so we all have to accept that responsibility.
All right, let's talk about what else is on the priority list here when it comes to Congress. Tax reform is the next item on the Republican agenda. GOP congressional leaders are pledging to take up the issue this fall. Here's what lawmakers told Frank about what they want to see.
Show of hands, who agrees that you need to simplify the... Okay, so maybe we can get there.
I got a room full of senators responding to my question. This is really cool, I got to tell you.
Don't get used to it.
Okay, so most people agree tax code needs to be simplified. I think there are a lot of Democrats that would say, you know, we need to keep business taxes low. We need entrepreneurship. We need innovation. We need to grow the economy. We can't overburden small, mid-sized businesses.
You guys agree with that?
So Charlie Randall introduced legislation to drop the corporate tax in 2006 when we took over the majority for those 4 years. Nothing happened. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. It matters whether we can come together and make a deal.
Right now, I got to tell you, I don't care what kind of tax reform we do. We're chasing a rabbit we cannot catch, and that is our out-of-control spending. It doesn't matter what our tax revenue is. We're going to have great revenue this year, and we're going to come up $750 billion short of just paying those bills.
To be blunt, doesn't your president, a Republican president, say that you cannot touch Social Security?
Yes.
And you cannot touch Medicare? So is it the fault of the Democrats or the White House?
But you got to understand where does anybody know where the revenue for Social Security comes from? If you understand where the revenue for Social Security comes from, the revenue stream, then you better look at who's participating in the workforce, because the sole source of revenue is wage taxes by the employer and the associate.
No one's talking about debt. We're at $20 trillion and growing, and no one's even worried about it. We're not doing anything.
I mean, that's the rabbit we can't catch.
About it, and our constituents talk about it. They talk about the debt, and they want to know what's going to be done on that. They're frustrated, like Mike is saying, by what does not happen through the budget process and how we don't deal with the mandatory spending. They're frustrated that there is uncertainty about their health care, and they're frustrated that their taxes are too high, and they want to see tax reform. And they want to see it done in a bipartisan manner.
I'm all for tax reform, but you better take a look at regulation reform that was well intended,
the regulations
but
that
you
we
can't get there.
changed over the last 4 months, 5 months, without the help of the Congress most of the time, by executive order.
Right, and well, that's how they got there, was by executive order.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
There is a good possibility that the consequences of many of those changes in regulations will have your grandchildren and my grandchildren taking in air that is not as good as it is right now.
Well, I'll tell you one thing.
Not drinking the best of water.
I'll tell you what.
You may disagree, but that's the facts.
Well, here's what your grandchildren and my grandchildren face. It's $20 trillion.
It's easy to say that. It's easy to put on a bumper sticker, we are all for clean air. And then at the same time, allow the infusion. That's an easy thing to say. You got to back it up with your actions.
Well, we do. Yes.
You have destroyed the environmental rules of this country.
We talked about the mandatory spending. Everybody knows this elephant in the room. Who in the room is willing to reform entitlements to save them? I mean, who would be willing to do that?
I am.
And that should be a bipartisan issue because it's eating up the entire federal government's budget.
All right, so Frank, where did we see some potential agreement on tax reform?
Well, clearly on tax simplification, you've got Democrats and Republicans on board. And on the issue of some areas of government spending, I think you would find some conservative Democrats aligning themselves with most Republicans to make some pretty significant cuts to address the deficit and the debt. Where you don't have agreement is on some of these regulations, and you heard it play out there, where the New Jersey Democrat came after the Republicans in the room, claiming that they were basically poisoning the air and the water. And it was very explicit. And that's why those who say, well, there are divisions in Washington, they're correct. There are arguments over rates. There are arguments over who's going to get tax cuts. But the fact that they're all willing to simplify the tax code, at least start where there is consensus and work from there. My recommendation, frankly, to the GOP would not be to offer these huge legislative efforts that won't pick up Democrats, to instead break it into individual parts where Republicans and enough Democrats agree that you get a majority. And there are a number of areas where that does exist.
But, Frank, I wonder, after that exchange, as you pointed out, with the congressman from New Jersey going after the Republicans, is there not enough goodwill at this point to come together on those areas where they do agree because of the heartfelt passion and opposition and beliefs on either side?
You're partially correct. When you put everyone into a room, when the Republicans meet on one side of the Capitol and the Democrats meet on the other side, there isn't that goodwill that you speak of. But on an individual basis, and I saw it take place, these members want to meet again to discuss those things that they're working on. You had Congresswoman Barbara Comstock sitting right next to Congresswoman Debbie Dingell discussing the efforts that they made on hate crimes, successful efforts, I might add. So each one of them is pursuing bipartisan legislation. Almost all of them have been successful over the last year or two, but you're never going to hear it because it's never going to be reported.
Well, never going to be reported, but perhaps also, and not necessarily those particular lawmakers that you interviewed, but is it not true that some might see it as a political liability to be sitting down and seen as working with someone from the other side? That there are those elements of each base, not just talking about Republicans, not just talking about Democrats here, who will see any kind of outreach to the other side as reason to essentially vote someone out?
Absolutely. In fact, I would argue it's about 1/3 of the Republican base. and some are approaching half of the Democratic base, that if an effort, a genuine effort at bipartisanship did exist, that would be their excuse to vote against that congressman, congressperson, or that senator. And this is a real challenge for Congress to be able to basically highlight and prioritize these personal relationships that they all have over the partisanship that has seemingly taken control of Washington.
All right. Well, Frank, stick around, because coming up, is the American public getting the representation it deserves? That's one of the key questions Frank Luntz put to lawmakers on his panel. Their response is next. This is CBSN. We have more from Frank Luntz's conversation with a bipartisan group of lawmakers. So, Frank, tell us about the final clip we're going to hear.
Well, this is why I do what I do, and this is what I tried to bring to CBS. An effort to tell the truth about what's really happening in America from those who are either experiencing it or from those who are participants in it. And this is an example of members of Congress being as candid and honest as I have ever seen in the 25 years that I've been working at this. These are members who are frustrated with what's happening and dedicated to the people who elected them. Whether you are Republican or Democrat, I think this will move you. Let's take a look. Does America get the Congress they deserve?
No, they don't. This is not a place that across the board acts in the same way that people do on the battlefield. On the battlefield, people serve without regard for the consequences that could happen to them when looking down the barrel of an AK-47, and they don't serve based on whatever reward they're going to get for charging some gun nest with an AK-47 sitting in it. There's not regard for that personal sacrifice or that personal gain. It is sense of duty to country above all else. Sense of duty to country and sense of duty to your comrades, your brothers and your sisters in arms above all else.
Is Congress what the American people deserve?
You know, I agree with Brian. When you're in uniform, you have people of one political party or another, one ethnicity or another, one religion or another, and there is absolutely no barrier or obstacle that exists between us because there is that singular focus on mission and service and putting our country first. And that's what all of us were sent here to do.
But the reality of it is, we should have the mindset, it's we, the nation, before me, the partisan. Bottom line. I mean, as a matter of fact, the longer I've been here for 6 years now, the most dogmatic people have been here the longest. I think term limits are a good thing.
Oh, yes.
I think they're a good thing. And therefore, we ought not protect those. America is frustrated with the privileged class. If our goal is just to protect each other who are here, it's the wrong goal. The goal is to protect the American people.
We have to stop focusing and letting fear and hatred divide us, and we need to focus on what unites us. We're all here because we love our country, and I do believe in this room we are committed to working together. We got to lose the talking points, and each of us take responsibility for toning down the rhetoric, toning down the demonization.
Yeah, I apologize every time I go home. People say, "Hey Joe, you don't know how bad it looks," and we're watching television and what's going on in Washington. I said, you think it looks bad from the comfort of your living room? Try it from my seat. And it's just, we're not any happier than they are. I apologize. We are better than this.
On the battlefield, what allows me to say I have zero regrets, and every other service member that I know to say they have zero regrets, is that we serve something bigger than ourselves as individuals. That's what makes everything, any sacrifice that we have to incur, that's what makes it worth it, that we did it for something bigger than ourselves. And if we can do everything we do here for something bigger, this country, then we're going to win.
Really profound exchange there, Frank. I wonder, what was your thought as you were hearing these lawmakers talk about that?
That I have to bring this to the American people. I have to find a way, and this is the source to do it, that it's my responsibility to let the public know that there are these servants of the people who understand what their responsibilities are, acknowledge their weaknesses and their failures, and are trying to do this on behalf of the constituents they represent and the country that they represent. Look, I mean, this has been very hard for me over the last year to listen to the negativity and the divisiveness. This is not the politics that I entered when I was a kid. This is not the politics I want to participate in over the last 25 years, and it got worse and worse. I walked out of that room feeling great. I walked out of that room believing that just maybe if we can take people like me, people like you, all of us out of this and let these representatives sit and debate the way our founding fathers did, debate the principles and the philosophy of this, that there is more that brings us together than pulls us apart. I realize that that's not a popular thing to say right now, that Congress has about a 15% job approval rating, but I see the potential. I know what they can do, and for the first time in a long time, I'm at least somewhat hopeful that they can get it done.
I have to say, Frank, it was so illuminating to hear those lawmakers essentially drop their guard. It sounded like you really were talking to actual people, and I think sometimes the discourse, as you've noted, can become so coarse that people forget these are public servants. So thank you for bringing that conversation to us and for reminding us of our shared humanity. CBS News contributor and Republican strategist Frank Luntz.
Thank you.